What would be most useful for you in our conversation today?
I really, so kind of to long story short, I started my journey back in December last year, and took my first Lsat back in March, and identified that my ADHD has been quite an issue for me. So I was approved accommodations earlier this year, and then I took my test back in June, and then again in September. I'm kind of stuck around low 150s, trying to build my way towards 160, 165, 167. And I would say I'm kind of stuck on the stage of plateau right now. And now I'm just trying to practice more and more to be able to be efficient at the difficult questions, whilst being able to analyze the right answer choice. So my biggest issue has been finding the right answer choice and being able to align that with the stimulus itself. I would say I've got a good grasp at understanding what the stimulus says and being able to break down the argument itself, except like a few rare occasions. But my challenge has been being able to find the right answer choice that basically answers the question itself.
For logical reasoning, for example, are there any particular areas of difficulty that you've noticed in terms of certain question types or certain methods of reasoning?
Yes. So I would say like I'm pretty good when it comes down to weakening or strengthening an argument. However, when it comes down to more so, let's say, necessary assumption side of it, it has been a bane of my existence. I haven't been able to crack it through because it's so subtle that it's harder to find in the stimulus and being able to choose the right answer choice that matches with it. And then as basic as it sounds, point of disagreement or agreement has been quite a challenge for me. Again, being able to find the right answer choice that aligns with what are they disagreeing over. And then I would say flaw is a hit or miss, more so a hit over a miss. But when it goes down towards, let's say, a difficulty level 4 or 5, then that's when it starts to become quite challenging.
Right. Okay. So let's dive in with necessary assumptions, since that's one of the most common question types.
Yes.
And it's the first one that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you typically looking for in the choices for necessary assumption?
Well, from what I have gathered through the knowledge I've gained from other tools, necessary assumption is looking for more of a subtle assumption, an assumption without which an argument will literally fall apart. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Now, it can be quite challenging because the mind's so used to, let's say, the sufficient assumption where you're just looking for a basic answer choice and being able to find something that can literally break the argument itself. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but that's been quite kind of a challenge for me. But that's kind of what I look for in an answer choice.
Yeah, it is implicit. It's something that you already know based upon the stimulus. So I like to think of it as, how can I squeeze as much out of this argument as possible? How can I extract all the information from what they have given me in that stimulus if I had nothing else to go on? So for example, if we have the given statement, God created the world, you can then infer from that there is an underlying assumption that there is or was a God at some point. If there was never any God, period, then how could God have created the world? So a person who believes in that given statement is logically committed to also believing all underlying necessary assumptions.
Right.
So I think of these as a very specific kind of must be true question, where the correct answer is not really new information. It's something that you already know based upon the stimulus.
Okay, so then, I mean, with must be true and most strongly supported, we definitely try to create an inference of our own. However, it's kind of literally given in the argument itself. So with the NA, would you suggest trying to identify or find something in the stimulus itself, or trying to add an assumption outside the stimulus?
Well, it may not be directly. The difference is that necessary assumption may not be explicitly stated in the stimulus anywhere, but logically, it is required by the stimulus.
Okay.
So this can take two different forms most commonly. One is if there is something totally new mentioned in the conclusion that never appeared in the evidence, there must be some kind of link between that new thing in the conclusion and the evidence, or else the argument wouldn't make any sense.
Right. Okay.
Another big difference, of course, is that necessary assumption questions, by definition, relate to arguments, whereas must be true and most supported can often be fact sets.
Okay.
The other thing that necessary assumption questions may have is where you are defending the argument against potential problems.
And I think, and that's again from my previous knowledge, what I learned is with NA, they can be either of the two. It can be one way is to bridge the gap, and the other way is to block the gap, block certain other parts that can actually destroy the argument itself. So I think when it comes to bridging the gap, it works well when I'm trying to resolve a question. However, when it comes down to blocking certain other arguments or other facts, then that's where it kind of throws me in a world full of dreams and wonders.
Yeah, yeah. Those tend to be more difficult because it's all the things not mentioned. We're pushing those all aside and saying, no, it's not any of those other things. And so it could necessarily be that you're dismissing one potential alternative out of several that would all need to be dismissed in favor of the stated explanation or cause.
Okay, right. And I think Ellen Cassidy's book has been quite helpful when it comes down to that, because it gets you into the habit of kind of translating and being able to create your own inferences, to be able to create those assumptions in your mind. So when you are blocking them, you kind of know the answers that the argument is looking for as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. What would you say when it comes down to more the flaw side of it? So when we are trying to identify the flaw more on a higher difficulty, how would you like any recommendations that you can give to resolve those questions?
Well, for flaw questions, I'm always trying to prephrase or predict the flaw, to identify it in my own words before looking for a description of it in the choices. It's much harder to recognize it in Lsat's language if you don't already have an idea of it for yourself. So the first step for me is just slowing down and trying to figure out what's wrong with it. And the question stem told me there is something wrong. So if you can't find anything wrong and you think it's fine, then that's your problem right there. Slow down, find the flaw, then look for Lsat's articulation of the flaw in the choices. And it will sometimes be one of those classic logical fallacies, but in most cases, I think it's really just something the argument failed to consider or did not bother to explicitly state that is related directly to the reasoning in the argument.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Thank you. And then with logic games, I think I'm pretty good with it. Like last September one, which everybody found quite interesting with logic games, I was -4. So I would say I did pretty decent. My other other challenge in LSAT has been mainly RC, reading comprehension. And again, that kind of goes back to, I would say, like even just maintaining the focus because of my ADHD challenges, being able to kind of break down the stimulus into multiple components and multiple points itself. So something I'm doing right now, and maybe you can give some feedback on that, is I usually read a paragraph, like the first paragraph, and then I'll write down the gist of it in the second and third and fourth. However, when I go back to questions, I understand what the question is looking for. I still have a challenge in being able to find the answer and connect it back to the stimulus itself. So I don't know if you have any recommendations on that.
Well, paraphrasing is definitely a great strategy to test yourself, to make sure that you understand the text, the passage, and reading comp, the paragraphs there, or the stimulus and logical reasoning. To articulate it in your own words is really the only way to prove that to yourself. In terms of relating that to answers, it may just take more time and more practice to make sure you've properly determined what is actually being stated there.
Okay. And then any recommendations that you suggest when it comes down to the structure side of it? Like when it comes down to, sorry, I should rephrase that. So when it comes down to the LSAT curriculum or LSAT practice on a weekly basis, any recommendations that you can provide to, create a structure to be able to get the best out of it? And because that's been kind of a challenge as well, being able to kind of focus and being able to, get the most out of my one practice session itself.
Well, when are you taking the LSAT?
I'm planning on taking it in April, and then I'm planning on applying in fall 2020.
Okay, and you're talking about now getting the most out of doing one timed exam?
Yes. So right now I've taken a hold from doing any like practice tests, for example. So what I'm doing right now is just getting through a loophole book and then being able to practice on a weekly basis, and then really hoping that in April I'm able to get the score that I'm really looking forward to, which is kind of a 15 jump. But I've been able to bring from my March to my September, I was able to get a 14 jump, which was pretty good. So I'm really looking forward to doing exactly the same thing.
Nice. Well, you've got a few months, so you can really do anything at this point. I would say taking some time right now to build a strong foundation, either with the book or with video courses, just to gain proficiency in the basic question types, which I think you've already done a lot of up to this point, but filling in any gaps you see with certain question types that we discussed, for example. So maybe read the textbook chapter on those question types or watch videos on those types, then do several practice problems of that particular type to drill it. Then once you've better seen the patterns and how to approach those questions from the proper perspective, then you can begin to pull it all together again, doing full-length timed exams. And you could even just do one exam a week after you've built that foundation, where you solidified it in the final, let's say 2 to 3 months. Just one exam a week along with detailed review of that exam, it could be enough.
Okay. And when it comes down to reviewing side of it, I know that there is a blind review that's out there that, like that's something we should do. Is that something that you're more in support of? Is there another strategy that you can provide to review and be able to identify the challenges in the questions?
Yeah, sure. I think that most students don't spend enough time reviewing. They neglect it in favor of just doing more exams to be able to measure themselves again and have that dopamine kick of seeing what the results are going to be. There's that excitement and that uncertainty there. But really the value is in deeply analyzing everything you got wrong and everything you have difficulty with, and specifically for logical reasoning, seeing where your misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it misunderstanding the stimulus, the question stem, or the choices? And especially the tricks that LSAC lays in each of those areas to make it more difficult, like presenting the same concept in an unfamiliar way, or using difficult indicator words, or failing to include indicator words at all for evidence conclusion or necessary and sufficient conditions, or that one little word in the answer choice that makes it wrong, or the phrasing that makes a correct answer discouraging. And there's many, many tricks like this, many patterns like this, and it really requires a lot of analysis and time to spot what you're falling for, but it's important because otherwise you run the risk of making the same mistake again.
Right.
And you can note all of this in a journal. You can keep a running journal of every question you've ever had trouble with and what tricks you fell for, what made it difficult. Like maybe in one case, it was forgetting halfway through a sufficient assumption question that it was actually that you were framing it as necessary assumption, or vice versa, or that you improperly translated the word unless, or you got the conclusion and evidence mixed up.
Right. Okay. And then I would say one last question. I've kind of got into habits over the last little while, and I mean, in certain question types has been very helpful to me, such as must be true, but I usually like to diagram every logical reasoning question into the logic language. So like using the conditionals, using the indicators, so on and so forth, into the conditionals itself. Do you think that's a good strategy when we're actually going into like an actual LSAT?
Definitely not. It would take way too much time.
Okay.
I recommend diagramming very few LSAT logical reasoning questions. Most of them I would not. So the ones I would consider diagramming are sufficient assumption, some must be true, some parallel.
Okay.
And really for no type would I do it all the time. It's only sometimes, only when there's strong conditional indicators. But most types I would not diagram. So I would not diagram flaw or necessary assumption or strengthen or weaken. Most of logical reasoning is informal logic, meaning it's more inductive reasoning. So you're engaging with it in a more real world sense, like you were having a conversation with somebody. But those other types I mentioned, they can at times lend themselves to a more formal approach that's deductive in nature, where you can mathematically derive the correct answer.
Okay. I think those were kind of all the questions that I have for you.
Awesome. Well, before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
I think it was good to analyze certain ways that you would approach certain questions, like such as, for example, necessary assumption. You were able to give me some insights on that. as well as just being able to create a structure. And again, just referring back to even, using conditionals to be able to diagram an argument, being able to understand what things are important for when we are going into an actual LSAT, taking an actual LSAT, certain approaches that we need to do differently. So I think this was quite helpful to me.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, please keep in touch and let me know if I can help in any way as you go forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.